Good afternoon. I'm so glad everyone's here. It looks like we've got 34 or so attendees, which is extraordinary. This is a super important topic in cannabis and actually a super fascinating topic in cannabis. So welcome to Waste. We have a terrific panel today. My name is Gretchen Giles. I'm the Vice President of Human Nature. We're a bi-coastal PR firm that's dedicated to cannabis companies and helping this industry grow. And we have a terrific, stellar group of people with us today, including Cole Gibbs. Cole is the founder and CEO of Dama Distributing. He decided to start Dama Distributing to pioneer the development of sustainable hemp plastic, which is a huge game changer, and compliant packaging solutions for cannabis and hemp industries. We also have Sandra Elkine. She's the co-founder and CCO of STO Responsible, a Boulder-based sustainable packaging solutions company that serves our industry. She serves as head of product research and development and oversees the marketing of the STO brand, which I believe is a woman-led brand overall as well. We have Chris Lane, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for Airfield Supply Company. It is the largest single-site dispensary in the state of California, based in San Jose, California, and he was responsible for brand and growth strategy across retail and products. And lastly, but not leastly by any means, we have Lily. Last name, I'm taking a running start at it. Kind of Ainen.
That's close.
Okay, would you help? What is it?
It's Gainanen.
That's what mine wasn't close at all, Lily. You're very nice. She is with Changemaker Creative. She's a sustainable packaging designer. She's the person who takes your hemp plastic and turns it into something super beautiful and groovy that clients are actually going to pick up. She's been designing beautiful things for nearly 20 years. In 2016, she left the nonprofit world. She was working for environmental and social justice at that time, and she went all in with the cannabis industry, and we're glad that she did. Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you. So we had a wonderful pre-panel discussion, and I think one of the things that I really enjoyed the most about it were the simple things that someone like myself who's not in the waste industry just never thinks about, which is like, Cole, why is biodegradable such a bad word? Tell us a little bit about, let's get into this, what consumers think and what the reality is with cannabis packaging waste.
Yeah, so biodegradable is one of those terms that is unfortunately thrown around a lot in sustainability, cannabis, and any industry really. The problem with biodegradable is there is no set time frame, there is no certification for biodegradable. It's just kind of a buzzword more than anything. And unfortunately, it does confuse people when there's a bunch of other terms out there like compostable and eco-friendly and sustainable, and all of this makes it even more confusing for the average consumer to really understand exactly what they are buying or how to properly dispose of what they're actually buying.
I think sustainable is just one of those balloon words. It's just empty and full of gas. And would you say that biodegradable is similar to that it's really doesn't mean anything in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, sustainable is a little bit more defined as, something that can sustain itself without harming the environment. Then nothing lasts forever.
Yeah, right. I mean, eventually, right? The atomic half-life and all. And Sandra, why is recycling versus reuse? What's the balance there? What's the tension? Isn't recycling reuse? I mean, if I take something and I'm very careful about it and I clean it and I throw it in my blue bin because it's going to go in the stream, am I not recycling it, or should I be trying to put a bit of soap in it at the end and use it again?
Yes, so recycling and reuse are very different. First of all, recycling will take more energy to process and and put out more carbon emissions. Reuse, there's a couple options there. We have the reuse of sort of glass containers within the industry. Like in Colorado, you're allowed to bring back packaging to the dispensary and they are allowed to reuse that packaging. Or you have reuse in your home. So it continues the life cycle of a product instead of it going directly into the waste stream. If there's a use for it, it can be reused, and that eliminates the carbon footprint of recycling it, or even going out and buying a product that would do the similar same type of, solve the same need in your home.
Right. Well, I'm just going to leap nimbly from the tree branch you provided over to Chris Lane, whose dispensary is receiving packaging from consumers who are coming back, customers who are returning to the dispensary, bring previously acquired plastic packaging to you with the idea that you're going to move it forward and keep it out of the trash stream altogether. How is that working? And what is customer response to that idea?
Yeah, it's a really interesting process. I think in one of the fascinating things I think we've all talked about here is we've tried all the different ings I think possible. We've tried recycling, upcycling, cross-cycling, reclaiming, like all of these different things. Because I think there's such a complex solution that needs to be have here. So this process of sort of recycling and upcycling is something that rather than just having it end up in a landfill, we've worked with a company called Resynergy out of Santa Rosa, and they are in the process. They can take cannabis waste plastics and turn them into various different kinds of fuels. So that's something that we found in lieu of if these things can't go into a traditional recycling program, at least they could have a home. But again, to Sandra's point, what's the carbon footprint on that home? How do we do it? So all of these tools and all these different things, it seems like, there's incremental change that's possible. But I think for all of us, we're trying to figure out like, what's the home run answer, right? Mm-hmm. What's the answer that allows us to never generate products that have to be sort of compromised on how they end up in a better place at the end. And that's really what we're focused on constantly, is figuring out that big home run answer.
Right. And Lily, what is the big challenge with this? I mean, what's the big problem, man? I mean, I understand that there's child protective concerns, but why aren't we all just using hemp plastic and everything's beautiful, and I don't know, we can grind it up and smoke it ourselves afterwards. I mean, what is the challenge here?
Well, part of the big challenge is that the regulations are different in every state. Like in California, all cannabis, including the biomass, is considered hazardous waste, and you can't recycle or compost it really. And then when you add on, recycling is different in every single municipality. So what's recyclable in your where you live versus where I live is different. And right. then when you go even further on that, the amounts of the recyclables that we put into our blue bin being actually recycled is very minimal. So overall, we're not going to be able to recycle ourselves out of this mess. We're going to have to think of other ways to not have packaging or have less packaging.
Right. I mean, I think that's the most distressing of all. Every time I put something in my blue bin, I just sadly, I go to the trouble, I clean it, and I know that I'm really not doing anything in the first place. Cole, what's the answer? Just real simple, Cole. What's the answer?
Yeah, just one simple solution. Yeah, no big deal, right? Moving over to a circular economy and getting away from that take waste linear economy that we have now, and even moving over to some types of bioplastics might not necessarily be the answer to begin with, because a lot of them require commercial composting to break down. And those facilities don't always take them, or that facility might not even exist in your state, for example. So that might not be the answer either. But moving to that circular economy where we can take something, reuse it again, hopefully, before it's degraded to a point where we have to do something with it, like composting or possibly recycling it, like steel, which is infinitely recyclable. It is very energy intensive to recycle steel, but you can recycle it forever and it doesn't lose any structural integrity. So the beauty of steel also is it's very rigid. So you can wash it and reuse it several different times before you have to get to that point.
That's really true. So Sandra, if we, would I be able to, so you manufacture recyclable dupe tubes, is that correct? Is that among the design that you do?
One of the things, but we also have other products as well. Yeah.
Sure. So how would I create the linear loop? Let's say I buy a joint, a pre-roll, it's in that. Are you envisioning a future where I could bring that back to the dispensary and the bud tender could refill it for me? Or what are the thoughts? What is thinking around that kind of circularity?
Well, in cannabis industry, that would be ideal. I mean, we strive to use the highest quality material so that it can be reused in that way. There is also the option of using aluminum or glass or other types of material. But yes, ideally being able to bring it back to the dispensary and allowing them to reuse it. One of the hurdles, though, that we face, of course, is knowing whether or not that stays child resistant. And the child resistant certification, it's a very stringent certification, and it's based on the specific mold that you're making the product out of. So there are some hurdles, not only in the policy of bringing back and the municipalities allowing for cannabis packaging to come back into the dispensary, but we're also trying to work through and figure out, does that mean that that product still holds that child resistant certification? But hopefully we can solve all of that. And we're seeing in Colorado that there are a lot of people working on that and other companies who are working on that. So we hope to see that as the future.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I know in California, we don't treat cannabis like an agricultural product. We treat it like plutonium. I mean, that's the joke, haha. It's not really very funny. But I'm wondering, Lily, what's the challenges at a package designer you have? Are you trying to think those? Are you trying to live imaginatively in a circular world so that what you're creating today would do those things, even if the world is not quite ready for it, if the laws aren't quite ready for that?
Yeah, the laws are really the difficulty, because ideally we wouldn't have to put a joint in a child resistant thing because it's not activated as it is. Like if your kid knows how to operate a lighter, they probably know how to open the joint tube. So if we could just sell the joint into a little paper bag, like maybe that's all we would really need, but that's future stuff and that needs regulatory changes. But yeah, as far as like the design goes, like what I try to do is, first of all, educate all my clients on, so you can choose this or you can choose this, and this is kind of the footprint of this version versus this, and this is the cost difference between these two options. You can pick the eco thing or like doing the best we can with the stuff we have. I do have one client where we did like a really pretty pre-rolled tin that is meant to be bought separately, and then you can buy refills that come in little bags for that, so that you're not buying, also you're not spending the extra several dollars that tin cost every time you want to buy 5 pre-rolls. So doing like a refill, just a baggie, which is so much less material.
Now, I know you're based in California, like Chris and I are. Is that something that is in California?
Yeah, this was in California. Yeah.
Oh, fabulous. Oh, good. We've got a question. Ben asks, Lily, how does that work with compliance then?
Well, the baggie itself is the child resistant thing, and you're kind of selling the keepsake. Right. It's almost like you have 2 versions of your product. You have the kind of like when you buy a Method soap, you can buy the one that comes in the pump, or you can buy the refill bag. So it's kind of the same idea. Except
that Method soap isn't, licensed and overseen the way that we have with cannabis. That's for sure. Ben wants to know if I can bring it back to the store to have it refilled.
No,
that would be the way to go.
That's not allowed yet, but sure. That's ideally how we would do it.
Chris, you've got 2 little kids and you run a dispensary. I'm sure that after one of your kids chews on an unlit joint for the first time, he probably won't do it again. But I know from my own experience that the first time that a kid chews on like baker's chocolate or something, he'll do it again, because my kids did do it twice, the unsweetened baker's chocolate. So as a parent, but as moreover, as someone who runs a dispensary, isn't there sort of like, why are you actually trying to make it a little easier? Well, no, that's not true, I guess. I'm just wondering what the dispensary's point of view on this is. It protects you on the one hand from lawsuits, I suppose. But on the other, you're putting out unnecessary packaging and you have quite a high volume, so you're selling a lot of it daily. How do you straddle that?
Yeah, I think it's a really complex question and we started dealing with this about 2 years ago when we it really came from sort of like one of those you can't sleep at night moments. where our CEO walked in the morning and was just literally like, I can't sleep at night. We see about 1,500 people a day. They buy an average of, let's call it 3 items a day. That's 4 to 5,000 items, 150,000 items a month, give or take, that have 4, 5, 6 pieces of plastic on them that get thrown in a landfill or something, one of those moments. And so we really started the process of looking at sustainability and all of these topics completely blindly. None of us are sustainability experts. And we started just talking with all the different partners and saying, hey, listen, we need to do better. We all know we need to do better. We're going to commit to these kind of actions that we know we can control immediately by the end of the year. We'd like for you to commit to start looking at your packaging, and started all these discussions. And what we found was that there was just a massive lack of industry knowledge, industry resources, consumer education, marketing around the idea of it. Some people out there are actually doing way better than they talk about, but they think people don't care. And they're doing it because they feel like it's the altruistic reason. And so we started to really sort of form up a plan of how do we bring sustainability to the forefront of the industry conversation and the consumer conversation. And that's where the sort of straddling the line thing became, what are these short-term opportunities to improve in the world, in the industry? What are these short-term education opportunities? And now how do we start looking at the long-term side of it? And so now we're really still in the process of understanding that and really figuring out where the right line is. There is a line a consumer won't cross. And so you still have to run a business, right? You have to figure out how you solve that. How do you make sure that even when you have to compromise, you're compromising in the best possible way for now. But in places where you can push it farther, how can you do it? The glass jar in California is like a classic example of a really heavy product that doesn't need to be heavy, but the consumer wants it. So how do you find a balance there? How do you find a balance with doob tubes, with labels, right? Adhesives, all these different things on the packaging side that still can create consumer education opportunities. And it's a big lift. We've actually done a lot of marketing. To tackle.
Wow, that's a lot. Cole, are you the one that doesn't think that ocean captured recycled plastic is all it's cracked up to be on this panel? Or do we all share that idea? It sounds like it's a great solution.
It has its pros and cons. It really depends on what it's turned into, essentially. What is the end product? Once you pull that already degraded plastic out of the ocean, what do you turn it into? Because what happens is as that plastic sits there in the ocean, it'll break down into microplastics and degrade and actually pick up trace chemicals that are already in the ocean, from BPA to DDT and everything in between. And then taking that degraded plastic and making it an FDA approved food grade plastic is a very labor and chemical intensive process to remove all of those impurities to make it a usable plastic once again. And for cannabis, that's not really the best way to go, because it's just going to end up back in the ocean anyways as a stronger, more rigid plastic that will take even longer to break down.
Right.
As we know in the recycling stream, most recycling centers have a 2-inch hole diameter throughout the system. So a lot of the pre-roll tubes and smaller packaging actually just falls through the system. It lands into a giant pile with everything else. And that all gets sent to a landfill or incinerated or shipped overseas, unfortunately.
I didn't know that. There's so much we don't know. I mean, there's so much the average consumer doesn't know, I think. I mean, I had no idea about that, for example, at all. Sandra, what do you think is better then? Are you of the same opinion as Cole? Do you feel that ocean retrieved plastic is not a great solution for cannabis? And what do you think is?
Well, I mean, our company has a firm belief there is no ideal product out there that exists.
Okay.
And anybody trying to do something is better than doing nothing at all. I do know that a fair amount of the ocean plastic actually hasn't even been in the ocean. It's actually reclaimed before it gets in the ocean, coming from markets that don't have a recycling system set up. I think one of the challenges it faces is it has a high carbon footprint, because it's usually, when used in the United States, it's being shipped across the world to get here. but ultimately the what they call oceanbound plastic was really what it is. It's actually stopping a fair amount of plastic going into the ocean. So, but I think right now we're sort of in this in-between phase where we're seeing a lot of new materials being developed that will give us a lot of opportunity in the future. And at this moment, just trying something to do while we wait for that to happen is better than nothing at all. But I would love to add something to what you guys were saying. I think in the cannabis industry, we're sort of kidding ourselves to think that the regulations are what caused the packaging problem. If you look at every other industry out there, they all have packaging problems. And let's just take the perfume industry to begin with. I mean, there are 15 layers of packaging to get down to a tiny bottle of perfume. And you look at the regulations in Canada on packaging, and they have eliminated multiple layers, and they've eliminated a lot of things that in other industries there would be. I think the problem we face in cannabis is that the child resistance makes it difficult for us to use some of these innovative materials. In order to pass these child resistant tests, using these materials make it almost impossible to pass the test. And so really, there's got to be a balance of understanding that it isn't just about the regulations that's causing problems in packaging. It's our need as consumers to want to have big, shiny packaging on all of our products. And ultimately, if we could get to a place where we could use these innovative materials, we would see a big change in this industry, because it's a driving force in using these types of materials. Sorry if that's off topic a little bit there.
No, not at all. That's a great thing too. And I think something that is fascinating about this industry, Lily, is that we are, it's a brand new industry. We have the opportunity to make it any way we want it to be, right? It's not entrenched. It's one of my clients talks about what if Elon Musk had invented the vehicle instead of Henry Ford? How different would our world be if we'd started out from that spot instead of, fossil fuel reliant? And that is true about cannabis packaging as well. What is your dream? What would you see if you could do exactly as you wished?
Yeah, to piggyback a little bit on Sandra's comment, like that is an issue. Like there are several very sustainable options that I offer my clients, but then they're like, well, but that's really ugly. I don't want that. Like that doesn't fit my brand. I don't feel like customers would want to pay extra for that because it's also ugly. So ideally what we would do is, and there's more and more stuff that's coming out where it's plant-based, but it still functions as well as anything else and looks nice, where it's, because it's still a consumer product and it's kind of a luxury product on occasion, like cannabis. Sure. And it needs to also kind of look nice for people to want to buy it.
Is that bearing out in the Dispensary Quest? Is that what you're seeing in the dispensary? Is that people are attracted to the looks and they talk about it?
Yeah, it's inevitable. I was having a discussion about this yesterday that, often the thing the consumer wants is actually bad for the cannabis product. Like the viewing window idea of like, oh, if you can't see the weed, you can't sell the weed, and the lack of a running phrase is funny because obviously like what's one of the things that degrades cannabis fastest? Light, right? So, it's always, there's a lot of give and take and I think most people try to play to today because in cannabis, so much of it is built on, can you make it to tomorrow, right? So much of the industry is built on compliance and daily sales and just getting it out the door and making sure the business keeps running because it is an incredibly complex industry where you have so many obligations and so many different things you're having to work with. So I think being able to both serve the customer for today while also looking at 6, 12, 18 months down the line and saying, what's going to be possible? Is a really common problem I think most people face. There are products in better packaging that will sell worse. So do you sleep at night for buying the better product, knowing your company can't make it to the next month, or do you buy the product works and ensure sales? It's the battle, right? Everyone knows a Mylar bag is terrible, but like, why are there so many dispensaries? Like,
There are those pre-rolls that come in a cardboard box, and you have to be able to stick your finger through the bottom of it and then hook through, and then you can pull up, I think, to get a cartridge out. And I always feel like the smartest person in the room every time I figure out how to undo one of those. But I wonder, Lily, back to aesthetics, cannabis is still coming out of sort of its crunchy phase, its association with horrendous graphics and, just ugly old-fashioned look and feel that we've really rejected these days. Do you think that plays into it when people are like, oh, that's ugly? They want something that looks more 21st century, and therefore that's where you start getting into Mylar and plastics and additional?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. I feel like there's a market for everybody, like the kind of spacey graphics, like there's people for that. And then there's people who will want something that feels more like a fashion brand or a beauty brand, kind of a more general consumer product, where like in beauty products, your carbon footprint of the product can be like 70% is the packaging. So we definitely don't want to be modeling too much after the beauty industry and the perfume side.
Right.
But yeah.
I have a question from the audience for a dispensary question from Merrill Gilbert. He wonders if California prohibits the collection of used packaging like glass, plastic, and metal at the dispensary level. Chris, that's a question for you. California doesn't prohibit that, does it?
Yeah, it's funny, the prohibit piece of it. I mean, you certainly can't do refillable packaging, at least not where we are currently.
Right.
So there are battles and things like that. One of the things that's required is tamper evidence. So you get to the point of how are you going to prove tamper evident on something if you're filling it yourself? I mean, you can't have the grocery store model where you're filling up your own bag kind of thing. So there are a variety of challenges when it comes to things like that. There are obviously solutions where maybe you are purchasing like Lily had mentioned, a one-time use sort of larger package that then you're buying refillable inserts, if you will. But I mean, you can't bring your eighth back in and get it filled back up.
Yeah, which is a shame.
Yeah.
I wonder if that will ever change. I wonder if we will change our stance on that. Probably.
Yeah, there are some states that allow that type of kind of reuse, where you can actually take in, like a large bag that's locking or a large container and bring it back in, and they can fill it up that way. I know California, you can take back packaging, you just can't refill it. So there are some companies that will take that packaging and turn it into something else.
That's what they do at Fairfield.
Yeah, same thing here in Colorado, same thing. You can actually take it back to the dispensary, and then it gets either cleaned or shredded and turned into something else.
Right. So Cole, is hemp packaging the best way? Hemp plastic, is that? Are you big on that? And can you evangelize on that for us a little bit? If so, I would like to know why it's the way.
Yeah, so hemp plastic is a bioplastic. Bioplastics can really be produced from any sort of plant material, whether it's corn or sugarcane, even coffee grounds. And there are a couple different ways you can get to an end product of bioplastic. And there are several different types of bioplastic that all have different end of lives as well. The most widely available bioplastic on the planet is PLA, it's polylactic acid. If you've ever seen a clear plastic cup and it says compostable on the side of it, those are made out of PLA. They require industrial
corn, right?
Corn, primarily corn, which obviously we know monocropping corn is not a great idea for a lot of reasons. But that packaging would require commercial composting. There is not a lot of facilities that will take that because being a acid, polylactic acid, it'll actually increase the acidity of the soil, so they cannot sell that compost to the farmers that would normally buy it. So they restrict how much they will take, or they just won't take it at all, depending on the facility. And there are some other types of bioplastics, PHA, PHB polymers that would allow it to be backyard compostable and even ocean degradable, because the polymer structure is slightly different and it's not as rigid as a PLA is, and it's also not an acid. So you can throw it in your garden and it'll break down. If your dog ate it, for an example, they'd be perfectly fine. They're non-toxic, thing like that as well too. So there are some great advancements when it's coming to bioplastics and polymers. It's really getting it out there on a commercial scale so that all these other companies can actually start implementing it into their products and packaging and create, toothbrushes or new plastic containers or pill bottles or everything in between.
Right. Sandra, what do you see as the resistance to that? What's the challenge? What's the roadblock to a larger adoption of that type of plastic?
Of the hemp plastics specifically?
Hemp or any of the type that Cole was just talking about.
Yeah, it's just about the scalability of manufacturing of the material. Hemp and the PHA. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, there's only 1 or 2 companies in the United States that are scaling up with PHA. And of those companies, the vast majority of it has already been bought by large companies like Pepsi Cola and Nestle. So smaller companies that make cannabis packaging, trying to get their hands on that material is very difficult. And then in addition to that, working with these materials in creating functionality that will pass the child resistant test is a little bit more difficult. Our company has been working on a design for about 12 months now, trying to kind of work through that issue. But when it comes to hemp plastics, we're seeing a lot more of it scaling up, and there being a lot more companies like Cole are actively producing more and more and more, so that other small companies can get access to it, and it will be hopefully something in the manufacturing stream that is consistent and that we can then scale for our customers' needs. So I really foresee in the next 12 to 24 months a lot of that changing. It's then just also getting past the hurdle of working with these materials and passing the child resistant testing.
And what happens to it? So a hemp bioplastic, for example, it would biodegrade more quickly than the traditional plastic that's currently being used. Is that correct?
No, it isn't correct. If you were to say just biodegrade within a landfill environment, no, it's going to break down at the same rate as a traditional plastic, but the benefit is that it's not going to be releasing and leaching toxins into the soil. And then it also has a smaller carbon footprint on the side of actually their manufacturing of the raw material. So it kind of has that benefit on both ends. But if it's strictly talking about bulk in the landfill, it breaks down at the same rate as traditional plastic. And I'm sure Cole can speak more to that if I was incorrect in what I was just saying.
Well, I don't want to dominate just your 2 little corners, but I do have the follow-up question is, if Pepsi Cole is grabbing up all of the good, corn-based plastic, why aren't more people hopping in to serve the big corporations that actually want to use it? I mean, what's the roadblock here?
Well, actually, sorry to interrupt. Pepsi is the one who's been financing the development of PHA, so which is different than the corn-based products. It's actually a soy-based product, and it is a little bit different. And Pepsi and Nestle, there's one company that has figured out how you can scale it fast, and they came in probably 4 years ago and really put a lot of money into helping that company expand and grow in their production. And so that's why they get, first right to the majority of that material. Once that company continues to grow larger and larger, there will be more available. But when it comes to the PLA, that's a corn-based plastic, there are a lot of companies that are producing it. But as Cole pointed out, producing it from corn is not particularly the best option. Producing it from hemp, PLA from hemp, is going to be a better option when it comes to the overall carbon footprint and overall effects on just even the agricultural stream in its whole system. So
that's fascinating. I come from the STEM movement, the maker movement, 3D printing, and everyone's so proud that we use corn-based PLA, and I never even thought about the points that you raised today, Cole. I mean, does everything have a dark side, Cole? Is there a Santa?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a silver bullet.
Yeah. And Chris, do you feel that dispensaries could make it? Could dispensaries become the new Pepsi to drive this kind of change? Is that something that is on your radar?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of discussions with across the industry about the power of buying is one of the really interesting things that's constantly coming up. For most people and manufacturers too, I mean, whether it's a dispensary or whether it's typically it's going to be a vendor side. But, even the larger vendors in cannabis are purchasing in the 1 million to 5 million units. A million units is not even a discussion point that a Pepsi or a Coke or somebody would even get in on. Why do they care? So there's some interesting trends that are coming now of people talking about sourcing of source buying, right? Of collective buying, getting people together, large groups of people, to be able to start having some of those meaningful discussions. You hear this story a lot in the beverage side of the industry about trying to get your hands on an aluminum can right now. Well, like, good luck battling, Budweiser and Pepsi and Coke. But if there are ways to do it and create leverage and create interest. But it comes down to people being willing to work together that are sometimes competitors. And also thinking about, in these things, if we standardize them, do you take away competitive differentiation? Do you take away value propositions? Do you take away perspectives that can be a benefit? So it's not as simple as just everyone banding together. If everyone bands together and has the same doob tube, well, yes, that's better for the world, but it's actually could be worse for those businesses. So how do you create that through line, which is where we as a retailer try to play that middleman and say, hey, listen, like, you may be annoyed that you have to share with your competitor this idea, but we're not going to carry either of you unless you do it. So, like, good luck. Like, so you got to find that balance there between what's best for the world and what's best for the business.
That's a great argument. Lily, do you find yourself in the position of having to argue or persuade your clients rather? This is a question that Meryl Gilbert wants to know. If you have to go back to design, form versus function, eco versus sleeko. I mean, do you find that that's a conversation?
All the time.
Yeah, all the time.
Especially when it's down to the bottom line, which is why I'm so excited about the collective buying idea, because that would bring down the costs. Because currently, choosing the greener option does mean adding more. One stat that I use in convincing people is that out of the mass market consumer goods, something like 80% of younger consumers say that they would be willing to pay more for a product that is sustainably marketed than the normal. Like, they would be willing to switch even if it costs more. Whether that's true for cannabis, Gretchen, like you're working on a study, right?
I am. In tandem with, it's being led by Airfield. Airfield is leading a California Cannabis Sustainability Coalition. There's one in Denver's, or in Colorado as well, I believe. And we are looking to, well, Chris, you speak to it. We're working with UC Berkeley.
Yeah. I was actually going to say it's funny, that exact stat, Lily, that you're talking about. There's been a lot of research done around that, and we actually just decided to go do some informal research with our consumer base to see if there was reflection of that exact thing within cannabis, and we saw a very similar number. With the most unscientific research ever. I think we had like 600 responses, and it's like 75% said, yeah, I'm willing to pay more. It was very similar in that feedback, and so. Yeah, we've started discussions with a large university, Gretchen mentioned, about doing some formal research into the consumer willingness on this. We did some informal research into the industry side too, and we kind of saw a really interesting pattern that I thought was fascinating, which was the barriers always from most brands, where first was cost, second was bandwidth, third was education, fourth was quality. Fifth was, does the consumer care in most people? And so we sort of turned it around and said, let's go prove the consumer cares. If we can prove that, and if we can prove that you will improve your business, that the cost is worth it, the time is worth it, the information, education, and resources are there, and the quality will integrate, you can change completely the way the industry will operate. So yeah, that's what we're really excited about is driving the consumer side with hundreds of thousands of people throughout California to say, this is worth it. Because if we do that, then we can also look at, there's the potential to look at lobbying up and saying, through this research, are all of these things completely necessary? Or can we look at some better ways of approaching this? Or should we be putting better standards on this? Do we not have enough standards on packaging when it comes to the things that matter? And do we have too many in the places that it doesn't? So it should.
That's a great final question. Cole, do you have an answer have you thought about that question that Chris just asked about too much one way and not enough the other? I mean, what brought you into this space in the first place? You must have been thinking about those questions, wrestling with them. That was for you, Cole. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear.
Oh,
Or
sorry,
is
I
that,
lost you there for a
is that
second.
like not even really a question? Did I just ramble on? Sorry. We have a question from the audience asking, aside from dispensaries, how can farms and distributors work towards using more eco-friendly products, like temporary packaging that might be used in harvest and stuff that isn't necessarily consumer touching, but is important as well. Do you work with that, Cole, at all?
Yeah, so there are some different ways to handle that kind of, I guess, material or even waste. There are a lot of companies that produce home compostable bags, everything from small little takeout grocery bags all the way up to, 30, 50 gallon bags where you can throw all your trim in. Or if you're transporting from one location, let's say from the grow to the dispensary, sometimes that's just done in just plastic bags inside a tote. Because it's large volume, and then it gets broken down and separated, or that gets sent to a processing facility and they'll extract it. So it doesn't always necessarily need to be in child resistant packaging. So there are, definitely options for that type of material and packaging and transportation as well to cut down on that waste. We are working with a couple companies to produce those plastic metric tags for the actual plants.
Yes. Yay.
That's huge. That is huge. Thank you for bringing that up. Wow, that's huge. Yeah, and that's the whole country is affected by that for sure. I mean, how many thousands of tags do people go through every week? I would reckon. Yeah.
Yeah, and that can all, add up as you change from cheap plastic, which is what got us into this problem in the first place, to more sustainable options. That's a slight increase. It may be, a few cents here or 10 cents there. And when you're talking about the consumer side, as we've been talking about, the consumer will pay more for it. But that's great. But how do you tell them why they're paying more for it? And is there a benefit for doing so in marketing that you're actually doing something sustainable? And from what we've noticed, and from Stern's Center for Sustainable Business at NYU, between 2013 and 2018, they found that companies that marketed sustainable packaging and sustainable options saw a 29% increase in their sales.
That's really remarkable.
I saw a crazy statistic similar to that, where in food and personal care, sustainably marketed were 16% of that whole market, but it was driving over half of the growth in food and personal care. Wow. So that's all we need to know, that it's big business.
Right.
It is.
Well, that's a positive note to end on. I believe our time is up. This is 45 minutes has just whizzed by. Is that right, Adam? Are we done, or can we keep talking? Someone said thank you. I believe that this is until 2:30 Mountain Time. Is that correct? Does anyone else have that in front of them? I'm sorry, I don't.
Says we get to keep going. Yay!
Oh, wicked, fantastic. So so does it come down to? It really comes down to changing consumer habits and expectations. But we're seeing that younger people will be willing to do that. What changes have you seen, Sandra, since you started STO and working with them? What have the trends been? Is it going greener, or are we complacent?
So yes, it's STO. The name of the company is STO, and things are going a lot greener. It's an interesting issue, because if you take California, for example, when they didn't have child resistant laws, you had quite a lot of different packaging. We actually saw a lot of like glass jars that had metal on the jar. And so then that made it really that was impossible for that to be recycled. And then when they put the child resistant laws in place, that really sort of changed the mindset and saying, oh, we need something that's more sustainable. So I really think that, even though those regulations are difficult, they're actually what are opening the doors to changing people's opinions and wanting to move towards more sustainable options.
How? Could you explain, give me a sense of your thinking on that? I don't follow.
Well, just in the idea that before there were regulations on packaging, the industry was really just sort of treated like all the other industries. And there was just a lot of focus on, the aesthetic of the packaging. And we weren't really thinking about the materials that were being used to package the products and what is the full life cycle of that material. And then once the regulations were put into place and a lot of things were now going into these very cheap plastic pop tops, it made people visually aware of the packaging and what the effects of the packaging are on the environment. And so as we move through, we start to see the child resistant laws becoming not required for flour goods, of course, staying when it comes to edibles where it's necessary. You're going to still have this mindset of people paying attention to and wanting more sustainable materials. And so it's sort of like going through this process has really kind of changed the consumer mindset on what packaging materials are being used. And I think one other hurdle, though, I also have to say is just the cost of manufacturing, in the cannabis industry, the cost of manufacturing packaging is very, very expensive. I know Cole has mentioned this before to me. You have a lot of people who come to us and say, oh, we want something custom. How much is that going to cost us? And we're like, great, that's going to be between $70,000 and $100,000, and it's going to take 12 to 24 months for us to do that. And people are like, oh, no way. And so, but what that also means is in the larger manufacturing companies, they're not so quick to start playing around with sustainable materials because it's such an expensive thing to do. You have these smaller companies who have some sort of eco drive, a purpose, that are taking the leap to try and do this. And I feel that we're seeing that happening in cannabis because that's sort of inherent to the nature of the industry. If this industry had been solely dominated by the CPG packaging companies, I don't think we'd have as much focus put into let's try and work with sustainable materials and see what we can do with it.
Yeah. Are you finding that to be true from your clients, Lily? Are people increasingly asking?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
Are you self-selecting because of the type of business that you have, so you end up working with those people more, or are you finding it across the board?
Well, my company actually started as a general, just for everybody cannabis packaging. And then as I found like all the people who I got the clients were asking for sustainable options. And I realized that there's a real need for, people are so confused about what's like, they kind of think that, well, it's recyclable, so it must be sustainable. And like just even understanding how to make those choices. So that's why I branded myself as a sustainable packaging designer, so that I can be helping. Like I don't have a master's degree in like environmental science, but I understand from learning from people like Cole and Sandra, like understanding the footprints and such, and helping my clients kind of navigate because it is complicated. It can be a little complicated and sciencey.
I think the more we unpack it, the more, it's a good problem. Right. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know, And Cole, Sabrina, one of our attendees, asks if you could parse just briefly the carbon footprint for processing hemp plastic. Maybe you could give us a quick vis-a-vis to more traditional plastic, or just to put it into context.
Yeah, so there's been some pretty good studies that have come out recently, primarily from Europe, regarding hemp and carbon sequestration and what it actually does compared to traditional petroleum-based plastics. And as we know, currently petroleum-based plastics create about 1.5 to 1.6 times its weight in carbon emissions for creating that material. Yeah. Hemp is actually carbon negative. It actually will sequester about 1.6 to 1.8 times its weight in CO2 emissions, making it a carbon negative plant. That, depending on how it is processed, there's a lot of green energy technology. You can be 100% renewable energy. So it really depends on where you're getting your power for that location. For one, it's not very energy intensive to begin with. It really just depends on how it's processed. So if a facility itself was carbon neutral, by the time you've processed, ground down the hemp, had it dried properly, and then actually turned into a material, that final material could in part be carbon neutral. It just more on the supply chain and how it actually gets there more than anything.
That's fascinating. Chris, do you have any hemp packaged plastic products that you're aware of? Does Airfield purvey those and search them out?
Yeah, there's a variety of them definitely coming on market, and it's interesting. I know several panelists here from Colorado. There's a lot of interesting action, I think, happening in Colorado that's been leading that, probably more than California, or more than I'd like to say California has. So it seems like you're more and more seeing things come online, and it usually comes on in small ways, and often from people who just sort of stumble across it. And to Sandra's point of how often you've had a client like ask for a one-off new product, I'm like guilty. I've probably asked every one of our packaging suppliers for at least one, if not two or three, like, oh, hey, we just need to change the diameter on this eighth container by 4 or 5 millimeters. Can you just go ahead and whip me up like
guilty
20,000 of those? Yeah, and they're like, okay, great. Like, we'll do it. You'll cover the cost. You'll have it next year. And see you, have a good Christmas. It's like, but I think so much of that, like to the same point, like so much of all of these problems, these like systemic problems come back to a lack of information. Whether it is, and what made me think of this, when you're talking about products in dispensaries, we stumbled across a packaging solution that was a significant advancement from something we were using because we just happened to see it on our retail floor. That the company that actually was using it wasn't even marketing it as a piece of their story. They just happened to source it because they liked it and it fit their aesthetic. And then it went from there. And then we reached out and we talked to them and we struck a partnership with that partner. And then they started working on something else. And it was this super organic, networky relationship thing. But it happened because there's the lack of information across this and the lack of a centralized discussion and forum and things like this. These industry discussions, these should be consumer-facing discussions as much as they should be internal. But because there is such a lack still of that centralized sort of theme, and I think people are scared to say they're sustainable too, because they don't know if they are. We have no idea if we really are super sustainable. We know we're trying. We know there's places we can do better, but I think inevitably, like the more it can become a comfortable topic that we know the consumer wants, the more you'll see widespread change. That it won't just be, do you have any products? It'll be, do you have any products that aren't? And that's the goal. That's where we need to try to get to.
Right. So Cole, is it those crazy young kids that have to save us all for this? Are we once again depending on the 20-somethings to come forward and demand this? Or how are you seeing that growth?
Yeah, I mean, the younger generation is definitely more focused on that kind of sustainability aspect. They look for companies that have some sort of ESG plan or maybe some sort of donation that they can be a part of. They want to feel good about the companies they buy from and the products that they actually purchase. So yeah, I mean, that is a driving factor. But when you look at cannabis and the hemp industry, most of the people that purchase the product, almost 60% are over the age of 55.
Yeah.
So they are also driving the demand as well. And they're just as eco-conscious from what I've seen. I grew up with composting in my backyard. It was, normal. We threw everything back there from food waste to lawn clippings, and it was just how we did things. And that obviously came from my parents. They're very eco-conscious. I mean, my mom makes her own soap and shampoo and everything. So I think that generation or the generations are still very eco-conscious. It's, again, education. Not a lot of people know that this new technology is out there, these new products are available. And yes, of course, they're more expensive, just like anything new. Flat screen TVs were several grand at one point in time, and now you can buy a 4K for a couple $100.
Right.
So as more and more people realize that these products are available, the cost will keep coming farther and farther and down, and we can get closer to that plastic pricing. But we're not talking dollars in price difference. We're still talking pennies. So if you're spending $50 to $200 every time you walk into a dispensary, an extra 50 cents or $1, so you don't have to deal with those plastic pop tops anymore, is welcomed. But there has to be a reason for that extra $1. This is why we're doing it, and this is why we switched, and this is why it's an extra $1. Educating the consumer as well. Oh, don't recycle it. You can throw it in your home compost.
Right.
I'd love to jump in on that if you don't mind. I think something that's never really talked about in packaging panels is the effects of 280 on packaging. I think that, and I know that Chris, you could speak to this, but I think that the cannabis producers are pinched left and right with cost. I think that things like 280E limit the amount of money that they can spend on other areas, innovative areas. And as soon as we see that release from them, they're going to be able, a 2 to 3 cent difference in packaging is actually huge to a cannabis producer. In other industries, it's not. And so as soon as we can see that release and them allowed to operate like a traditional business, they'll have a little bit more money to invest in things like sustainable packaging or other sustainable practices. And that's my personal opinion, but I really, from what I see from customers, these little tiny increases of price make a huge difference for them.
Hallelujah, sister. Chris, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, that's the rallying cry, Sandra, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in general, right? 280E creates a reality where everything you invest, every penny, you know, if it's not adding to your bottom line, it's taking from it. And it's a really fascinating play. I mean, as like a marketer and a creative person in the world, right? When you think about marketing expenses, even like the ability to be out there marketing this thing, not only investing in the packaging, but effectively marketing all of those things. I mean, it definitely has a ripple effect in every facet of the business, which is what's so interesting. And I think to your point, though, those 2 to 3 cents, you know, again, from the marketing perspective, you still have a chance to make 5 cents, even if you're putting 3 more in. That spend money to make money thing. It's not just a saying. I think it's a reality. And I think that's one of the things that hopefully in this industry, you know, we'll continue to see leaders that are out there being able to communicate that vision and that promise in a way that they can also deliver on it on the business side. And that's where I think this will get so interesting. You know, I had a discussion literally yesterday with a packaging supplier about the discussion of just swapping materials where there is a 0.5 cent cost difference. And he was like, "Oh, you're like amenable to that in an easy way." And we're like, "Yes, like we're pretty positive we'll get the return on that because we're going to make sure everyone knows that is like a better product that we're putting in there." So it's the commitment on both sides. It's developing it, and then it's also making sure you come good on it. You know?
That's great. Lily, do you have any final word? Don't want to leave you out of the end of the conversation.
Tax credits for sustainably run companies would be a nice incentive.
Yeah, that's for sure. Cole, what's your final word, sir?
Yeah, I think the industry, especially when it comes to sustainability, is just getting off the ground, especially in the cannabis industry and all these new technologies and hemp. And we just need more, I say, investment and education as well to bring this to market and make it more of a household name, I guess you could say, instead of just this grand idea of making everything a little better.
Exactly. I love it. Well, thank you all. This has been a terrific discussion. Fascinating. I learned a ton and very lively, so intelligent. Thank you very much. Let's see. Hold on. Is Lily, are you adding, Lily? Do we need to bring up one more thing? Absolutely. Another final note.
Shipping. Shipping is bad.
Hashtag shipping is bad. You heard it here.
Domestic sourced, USA made. Very important.
There you go. All right. Thank you everyone so much. Bye-bye.